Hi, welcome to the On Fire Show. This is your host, Daryl M.Brooks. I'm here with coming up with Mr. Linn Washington from the Philadelphia Tribune. Also, he is from Temple University. He's a professor at Temple University. Had two great shows. I had Alex Bethea, who's running for city council. He was on. He's a city councilman running for mayor of the city of Trenton. And then I had Culture Freedom from Poor Righteous Teachers on. This is the On Fire Show, and I thank Poor Righteous Teachers for calling in. Culture Freedom from Nashville, and he's doing his thing, and he's coming back. Poor Righteous Teachers are coming back. So I can't wait for their next CD to come out. Coming up, I have Mr. Linn Washington from the Philadelphia Tribune. He is on the show, and I'm waiting for Mr. Linn Washington to log on. Hello, and Taniqua, hello, and I'm waiting for Mr. Linn Washington from the Philadelphia Tribune and to log on. Hello, Mr. Linn Washington, are you there? I just sent him an invite. He's coming on the show. Mr. Linn Washington is also from the Philadelphia Tribune, but he's also from Temple University. He's a professor. He teaches journalism. This is Mr. Linn Washington. Hey, Mr. Linn Washington, you are approved. Waiting for Mr. Linn Washington from the Philadelphia Tribune. Hello, Mr. Linn Washington, are you there? I think you may have to turn your camera around a certain way, but you're adding you on, and we're going to go from there. All right. Yo, Mr. Linn Washington from the Philadelphia Tribune is trying to log on, and he is a knowledgeable brother and one of the greatest journalists this country's ever seen. And I'm waiting for Mr. Linn Washington. I think hello, Mr. Linn Washington.
Hey, Daryl. Hi.
How you doing? How you doing?
Okay, man. It took a little while, but I'm here.
All right. I am glad you're on. There were a lot of people excited about you coming on because I told them about you. We put out the ad about you coming on the show. Now, Mr. Linn Washington, you're from. Mr. Linn Washington, you're from Temple University. You're a professor at Temple University. You work for the Philadelphia Tribune. And you work for a number of news sites online. You've been all over the world. You've been to London. You've been to Africa. Have written great articles in the newspaper about a lot of political activists. So tell us about yourself, Mr. Washington. Tell the audience, people that are watching, tell us about yourself and the history of Linn Washington.
Well, I appreciate the build-up. I've been to a number of countries. I haven't been around the world. I haven't gone to the Arctic or the Antarctic.
It's
haven't
cold.
gone to Asia.
We don't.
Very cold.
We don't do too many cold countries like that.
Right. However, I've been to Iceland, and when I was in the Sahara Desert, I went there a couple of years ago on a reporting mission into the Western Sahara, and also the refugee situation in about the Western Sahara, which we could talk about later if you want. And I was shocked that in the desert at night in the wintertime, it got down to near 30 degrees.
Wow.
Although in the summertime, it could get up as high as 130 degrees.
Wow.
But I'm a professor at Temple University. I teach in the journalism department. Been teaching there for 21 years. I do investigative reporting, multimedia reporting, urban reporting, basic writing. And I've worked as a journalist actually since 1975. So I've as a part of that, I've been a basic reporter, investigative reporter, columnist, editorial writer, editor, and now journalism professor. And as part of my reporting, which I do a lot of community-based reporting, I do a lot of reporting on criminal justice issues, unfairness, racism in the criminal justice system, as well as taking a look at a whole variety of social justice issues. I've also done some forum reporting, so that's what you're talking about. I've been to London. I've written about police brutality over there, Black history. Yeah, there's a lot of Black history there going back to actually before the formal founding of London. London was originally founded by the Romans. They conquered Great Britain, what is now Great Britain, England and Ireland. In Great Britain also includes Scotland, but there's another part of that story which I'll get to in a minute. But they conquered that part of the world back in like 1 AD.
Oh, wow.
And they stayed there for over 200 years. And during one of those periods, the Roman general who was in charge of that whole area was a black man from Northern Africa. His name was Septim Servius. So black people have literally been in England from before the time London was founded, because as I said, London was founded by the Romans. It was called Londinium. And then London, evolved from there. So today in London, in certain parts of London, you can still see some of the original walls that the Romans built around their village, because they were trying to keep the savages out. And the savages were the British people. And I mentioned a minute ago that the Romans controlled England and Ireland. They went up into Scotland a couple times to take it over. The armies would go in, and a few of them would come out. So when they found out that they couldn't conquer Scotland, they built a wall across the top of England. It's called the Herdanian Wall, and there's still parts of that shown. I've been on the continent reporting. I've been to France, been to Germany, been to Italy, been to Austria, and then I've been into Africa. I was in Algeria, Western Sahara, Morocco, in Northern Africa, actually Northwest Africa, and then Senegal and Gambia in the West Africa, and then I've been to South Africa. This is about 4 times now. Okay. Doing reporting and taking students into South Africa so they could do reporting also. Okay.
You said you've been to Africa. One of the things I really want to talk to you about is the slave trade. Is there still any slave trades going on in parts of Africa and the Sahara?
Well, there is slave trading going on in Africa, and it's primarily now in the northern part, and the slavers are Arabs, and they do take black Africans in captivity. And now there's a real horrific problem in Libya, where the United States, France, and Great Britain are going to liberate the Libyans. They actually were helping to overthrow Gaddafi.
Yes.
And people that America backed, that Obama backed, are now doing enslavement of the black Africans there. Some who had lived there during the time of the Gaddafi leadership. And also now Libya is a point where people who are trying to migrate out of Africa to get a better life and go into across the Mediterranean and go into Europe, a lot of them are being captured by the Libyans and literally turned into slaves.
So the Arab Libyans.
What's that, Daryl?
So it's the Arab Libyans.
Yeah, it's the Libyans, and they're of Arab descent. And they're doing some of the enslavement there. There's enslavement going on in the Sudan. There was a play in London a number of years ago, and it's traveled around different parts of Europe. I don't know if it's come to the United States yet, but it's actually called Slave. And it was about this woman who lived in South Sudan. The raiders, mainly Arabs, came in, got her, took her to Khartoum, and enslaved her.
Wow.
And they sold her to some very wealthy Sudanese, and she ended up with a family of a guy who was a diplomat. So when he moved to England to be the ambassador or some diplomatic post for the Sudanese government, he took his slave with her. And they wouldn't let her out of the house. They wouldn't want her to talk to anybody. And one day she was out shopping for him, and she saw some people that looked like her. They started talking to her in the native language of Southern Sudan, and she was able to talk to them. Long story short, they helped her escape. The British government wanted to send her back, and there was a big ruckus, and she was finally able to get asylum in England, and it was turned into a play. Oh, now, wow. One of the interesting things for me, just the story itself was just fascinating, that here we are in the 21st century and there are still slaves. In fact, in England, there's an organization called the British Anti-Slavery Society or something like that. So they deal with this issue all the time. But the day that I went to see the play, watching the play, and there's this woman and she's just crying, and the play was very emotional. I'm saying to myself, well, wow, maybe this is an instance where the play really got to somebody. As it turned out, it was the woman.
Wow.
The very woman that the play was about was attending it that night, and seeing her story enacted, just evoked so much pain again. So that was really a fascinating experience, but that's a long answer to your short question. Yes, there's still slavery going on, and that's the more traditional type of slavery, but there is the more, it's not so much recognizable, but today there is enslavement, but it's more like wage slaves.
Yeah.
There's so much income inequity in so many parts of Africa, and as a consequence, many of the regular people are essentially living like slaves.
Wow.
When you think of, say, Nigeria, which is an oil-rich nation, but somehow the leaders have been so corrupt and corrupted that the Nigerian government owes the foreign oil companies money, and not the other way around. People in the part of the country where the oil is produced, where their land is horrifically polluted by the oil companies, they're living in slave-like conditions. Down in South Africa, where you have the largest income inequity in the whole world, there are people who are living in shanty towns that are so wretched, if they were to move to the worst places in the United States, they would think that they were moving 10 to 12 steps up the economic ladder.
Wow. Wow.
It's just outrageous.
Yeah.
When you go to some parts of Soweto, where people are living in shipping crates, you know, those big shipping containers they come across on boats?
Yes.
Well, some people are living in there, and those are the upscale houses. Most of the houses are built out of scraps in some of these sections, but when you come out, you can look up and you see mountains. Well, there's very few mountains in that part of South Africa. These are not really real mountains. These are man-made mountains where it's the waste from the gold mines. So in one way you look up and you see the enormous wealth that this company produces, and you turn around the back and you see the houses these people are living in, and it's just a wretched situation.
Wow. And so the U.S. government knows about this, right? And most of the European countries,
they know about it.
Sorry,
they know.
The UN knows about it, right?
Yes, they do.
And they haven't done anything about it.
No.
Why is that?
Well, listen, there's always a lot of talk. Yeah, we're going to do this and we want to do that, and so on and so forth. But when you look at the transition from apartheid to what they say is their democracy, you saw the hand of the U.S. in. Earlier this week on PBS, on public television, there was a documentary on Winnie Mandela. And if you and your audience could get a chance to see it when it's repeated, it's very fascinating because it really tells the tale so much of the latter years of apartheid and how they transitioned into what they have now. And the long and short of it is that the South Africans who had the wealth, some being of British ancestry, some from the Afrikaner, they wanted to retain the wealth. And so they, in turn, forced the ANC with the help of the United States and Great Britain to accept an unequal economic system, and it has only gotten worse as we've gotten further out. There were some people there, like Winnie Mandela and others, who wanted complete reform, where you got land reform. Because in 1913, the apartheid, well, not the apartheid government, it was still pretty much it was apartheid, but it wasn't apartheid run by the Afrikaners. It was more of the British descended people. They passed a law called the Land Act or something. Essentially, it said that black people in South Africa cannot own land anymore. Now, whether you own the land or you've lived on the land for thousands of years, it wasn't your land anymore. And that's one of the issues that created the wealth disparity.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is that everybody knows about the problem there, but everybody's trying to make money off of what's going on there, and thus the needs of the people are being overlooked. Now, did the ANC government do an awful lot? Yes, they did. They built since, 1995, over 2 million houses for the poor and the sub-poor in the country. That's a phenomenal record. No government on earth, not the United States, no government has achieved that kind of record. They brought electricity to places that didn't have electricity before. They brought potable water, water spigots, although still, a lot of people live in houses with no running water, no electricity, no flush toilets, all that kind of stuff. ANC has done a lot. However, they say that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. There's been a lot of very serious corruption on the part of some sub-level ANC officials, not so much under Mandela and Becky, but under Zuma, the corruption has just gone off the charts, so much so that the young in the country have pulled away from the ANC and have aligned themselves with a group called the Economic Freedom Fighters. These guys wear red berets, and they're rough, man. I mean, they'll go into parliament and literally start fights. And so I was there in 2014. That was one of the trips I went in. It was the 20th anniversary of the freedom of South Africa. And when you went to the Parliament building in Johannesburg, they had these big banners, 20 years of democracy, we're celebrating everything. But they had barbed wire out in front of the place, and they had armored cars, just like they used to run through Soweto and kill people. They had them parked in front of the Parliament to keep the economic freedom fighters out.
Wow.
It's a heck of a situation.
So wow. And you would think that, we're 21st century, 2018, and things would be changed by now, and it's improving, but it hasn't improved in South Africa.
Yeah, it's improved, but it hasn't improved, just like here. I mean, clearly there's been improvement since, say, 1968, when I was a high school graduate. However, many of the indices say that they really haven't improved that much. There's still disparities in our criminal justice system. We now have a president who openly preaches racism. There's still a lot of discrimination in the corporate sector, the academic sector. Look at the sports sector. 1968, what happened? Olympians were getting ready to boycott the Olympics because of the horrific problems that we had here. They decided not to do it, but they'll do individualized things. So that's why you had the Tommy Smith and the 4x400 relay team. They went out and got their medals. They had Black Panther green berets on, but they were fighting for a number of things. They were fighting for the recognition of the deprivations that Black Americans were enduring. They wanted to see better human rights around the world. They wanted to see Muhammad Ali get his titles back. And then we flash forward to 2018, and we have some Black football players taking a knee, doing a very peaceful, very passive kind of a protest to highlight the police brutality. Now, and let's keep the continuum between 68 and 2018. In 1968, we had a series of riots, but all during the 60s, we had a series of riots. In the riots before 68, the overwhelming majority of them, well into the 95+%, were triggered by police brutality. So now we have in 2018, Black football players and some other football players of similar mind like mine saying, hey, will we use our position as athletes to raise attention to this? And then what do we have? We get a lot of pushback. We get a lot of pushback from the corporate NFL, which really has an alarming lack of diversity, not only from the owner's level, but the general managers and the back office people who, while not make as much money as the 1,600 people who are on the field, they make really good money when it comes to the type of money that the rest of the population makes. But they're highlighting these things, and they're getting criticized across the board, just like the people did in 1968, and just like the people did back in the 1800s when the first Black went into professional baseball. Yeah. The first Black to play for Major League Baseball was not Jackie Robinson. It was a guy named Moses Fleetwood Walker. He played in the 1860s, and because he came on and he started playing, he was getting a lot of the very abject racism like Jackie Robinson endured. But around 1860, or maybe it was in the 1870s, Major League Baseball passed a rule, said we can no longer have colored people playing for us. Yeah. So yes, there's been a lot of progress, but there's been not as much progress as professed. People around the NFL and watching on news and talking to people in the community,
Do you think Colin Kaepernick will be, eventually get a position as a quarterback in the NFL?
I would be surprised if he did, because that would be an absolute recognition that they've done a gravest wrong to this young man.
Mm-hmm.
He has a good chance of winning his lawsuit. He will get a financial settlement out of it. But to see Cap play again and have him playing in the United States, I'm not too optimistic about that. Mm-hmm. However, I would like to see that just for a vindication of him.
Yeah, you know, and you know, there's been a talk around America and especially in the African American areas about boycotting the NFL. And you know, there's people putting out information on Facebook, on YouTube, online, you know, just talking about a boycott. But it's a little different. I mean, when you were growing up in the '68, finished high school, and in the African American consciousness back then, and you look at the consciousness now of the African American race, is there any difference from back then to now? And from all the way from activists to preachers to even athletes?
Well, you know, different times engender different kind of reactions. There was more of a sense of militancy in the 60s. There was more of a sense of a unity. But let's not look at this as the golden years. The activists in the late 60s were as ostracized by the larger community as the activists are today. Mm-hmm. And from my perspective, I'm seeing a rise in activism among the young. And as Martin Luther King said in his I Have a Dream speech, that talked about a nightmare before he got into his dream, but we forget about the nightmare part. But he praised what he called the marvelous new militancy among the young. So yes, there is activism today. There was activism back then. But, you know, we tend to look back on the civil rights movement and say, oh, wow, the Black community was really together and we was all on one purpose. No, Malcolm X was seen as a pariah but by a vast majority of Black people. Mm-hmm. And let's forget, I mean, everybody, you know, oh, yeah, we love Martin Luther King. I have a dream. Hey, they wasn't giving him much love either.
Oh, yeah. You know, and some of the YouTube videos I've seen Martin Luther King where he talked about, he said his dream was, I think it was in 1967, 68, he was being interviewed. You might have saw the same video interview. He said his dream was turned into a nightmare. They turned the dream into a nightmare. And, you know, how, and Martin Luther King basically, he changed the view of America when, you know, after the, you know, especially with the 4 little girls getting, the church getting blown up, when you had 68, when you had 67, the Vietnam War, when you had threats against his life. I mean, and when he started moving towards protesting in the North, in Boston, in Chicago. And, you know, he said, wow, see, this is a different type of racism up in Chicago. In Boston. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Different type of hate.
A different kind of hate. And he began to really get frustrated in the latter years of his life because in his heart, he just felt that if you made that moral argument, that if you said that this is fundamentally wrong, that the moral conscience of a country, and particularly a country that proclaims its Christianity and proclaims its fidelity to the principles articulated in its Declaration of Independence, and particularly in its preamble to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the rule of law, that things would change. He found out that it didn't. But the dream that he was saying in 68 or 67 into 68 had turned into a nightmare. Let's remember his I Have a Dream speech started off with a delineation of the American nightmare, from police brutality, which he criticized twice in that speech, to voting rights, public accommodations, employment. And as Dr. King got further and further into his life, he started seeing highlighted, because he had always had that sense that economics were at the bottom of the problems in this country, compounded by racism. Racism wasn't the major problem. It was the economics, and racism had always been used to mask I'm sorry, masked the economic exploitation that was directed against not only blacks and Hispanics and Asians and definitely Native Americans, but also poor whites.
Poor whites. Even in his speech, in the interview, he was talking about this, like, where they would protest in the South, and he would tell the poor whites, when they would lock the police officers that were locking them up, and say, y'all was suffering from the same type of economic injustice that we are. Your pay wage is not as great as ours. And so, even like I said, of the Poor People's Campaign, when I talk to people like Bevel and Dr. Bernard Lafayette, Reverend Al Sampson, all those guys, that Marshall King, that whole economic injustice, that he was bringing everybody together and everybody to come to a protest.
Well, his Poor People's Campaign, he was very clear in saying that he was doing this to help the people in Harlem, but also the people in the hollows of West Virginia.
Yeah.
So he was looking at all poor people of all races. He was highlighting the class piece, and he was tying in the inability, or not the inability, but the refusal of America to deal with these economic inequities, and tying it in with the war in Vietnam.
The war in Vietnam.
About how President Johnson's war on poverty was being stymied because money was being diverted to fight the war in Vietnam, where essentially they were fighting to keep a colonial rule there. We tend to forget so quickly that after World War II, when World War II ended, the British and the French, who had maintained colonies in Southeast Asia, wanted to reestablish their primacy there. So Vietnam, which is now the North and South Vietnam, which is now one country, that was a French colony. And the British had Hong Kong and Singapore, for the better part, Burma. But my point is this: before France could come back in and reestablish its colonial rule, because France had been decimated in World War II in Europe, the United States, as well as France, paid Japanese soldiers to fight against the Vietnamese who were fighting for freedom.
Wow.
Now think about that for a minute. The United States paid its former enemy, Japan, to have Japanese soldiers fight against Ho Chi Minh and the people trying to win freedom for their country. And once the French were finally run out of Vietnam in 1953, there was a big battle at a place called Dien Bien Phu. And the French said, okay, we're just tired of getting our backsides whooped. We're out of here. They put in a series of puppet governments. They partitioned the country. The North was communist. The South was supposedly democratic, but it was horrifically corrupt. But, it was still the capitalistic ripoff that was going there. And then America started, and so when it became evident that the corrupt South Vietnamese in America was popping up, who were anti-communist, when they couldn't win the battle, which now had become a civil war, then you started getting American advisors, then a few troops, then some Marines came in, and then the Air Force, and then the Navy, and then we had a full-scale war. So by the time you get into the late 60s, the military escalation that had started in the early 60s was really off the charts, and it was consuming billions of dollars, and that's what King was fighting about and concerned with, and that's what happened when he gave that speech in New York City. I think it was in '67, April of '67, where he came out against the war. And again, we talk about, we all love Martin Luther King. He was a hated man in America when he came out against that war.
And people, a lot of people don't know that. And when he spoke at the church in New York, and he also spoke at the UN, that UN building, at the big march at the UN in '60, I think it was in '67. And so, even Martin Luther King with his speech, "Where do we go from here?" People, he talked about, boycotting Wonder Bread, Coca-Cola, all these major companies that were not hiring African Americans, and especially in the South. He's talked about Wonder Bread. He talked about Coca-Cola, Seal Test milk. He was revolutionary. And so I want to get to the point that I want to talk to you. We got about a few more minutes, but I want to talk about the prison industrial complex, and you wrote plenty of articles about the prison industrial complex, what it has done to African Americans and poor people in general. And one of the things I talk about is the people why, when I was in Philly, a lot of people didn't support Hillary Clinton, a lot, especially the older generation, because they remember Bill Clinton, the '94 crime bill. And I think under Bill Clinton, more African Americans went to jail in any period in history. And also with Hillary Clinton, which she called African Americans, especially men, super predators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Clintons are very duplicitous. Bill Clinton not only passed that 1994 crime bill when he was trying to ingratiate himself with the opposition, with the GOP. Mm-hmm. There was an effort in 1995 to end the crack war. It started really in the early 90s when you started seeing a preponderance of African Americans going to jail for crack under the federal crack laws that had these, just enormous penalties. And there was efforts in Congress. So Congress ordered the U.S. Sentencing Commission to do a study to see what should be done. The U.S. Sentencing Commission came out with a real thick report in February of 1995 that said that you need to get rid of it. If crack cocaine, in terms of addiction, is no worse than powder cocaine or liquid cocaine. In fact, liquid intravenously injected cocaine was the most addictive form of cocaine, even more than crack. So essentially, they said, stop this. No, we don't think it's of a racist motive, but it's definitely having a racially disparate impact. So this was in February of 1995. And the way the process works, the U.S. Sentencing Commission is the body that Congress set up to give it advice on how to set laws related to criminal justice issues. Mm-hmm. So Congress had to either accept the recommendation or reject it. If they did not accept it, well, let me put it this way: if they didn't reject it, then it would become law. So we flash forward to early October of 1995, and what happened in Washington, D.C.? Oh, a 1 million man march. Mm-hmm. And, over 1 million people came down there, primarily black men.
I was there.
I was there. You were there too?
Yeah, I was there.
And you saw the signs, man. The signs were saying, get rid of the crack laws. Yeah. You had Jesse Jackson speaking against the crack laws. You had the head of the NAACP, who was a former congressman, Kwasi Nkrumah, from Baltimore, speaking against it. And a lot of people speaking against it. That very day of the 1 million man march, Bill Clinton
left Washington
and went out to Texas to give a major speech on racism. And in his speech, he said that, blacks have been treated unfairly, but he always had to put that racist line in. Well, yes, blacks have been treated unfairly and the criminal justice system is racist, but white people are legitimately concerned about black criminals, like all of us are black criminals, yeah, right? And so when he comes back to Washington, Congress convenes, they vote to not uphold the Sentencing Commission's recommendation. Now, understand that in the 12 years that the Sentencing Commission had been in existence at that point, they had made 500 recommendations to Congress, and every one of them had been accepted, except for this one. This was the only one that wasn't. And after the Republican-dominated Congress voted to reject the U.S. Commission, now, at the same time that this was going on, there was a parallel thing called driving while black. And that was going on. The Clinton administration ignored it, despite the fact that Clinton's Attorney General, Janet Reno, was from Florida. And the first big documentation on driving while black came out of Florida and New Jersey. And the Clinton administration didn't get on it until the last year of the Clinton administration, when Clinton's vice president was running for president. Al Gore. Oh yeah, we got to get rid of it. We didn't do anything for the preceding 8 years. Yeah. And if we roll it back, when Clinton was the attorney, when Clinton was the governor of Arkansas, there was a federal court order that ordered the Arkansas State Police to stop racially profiling Hispanics. They refused to do it, and the federal court slapped sanctions on them.
Mm-hmm.
So it is inconceivable that the governor of Arkansas would not know that the state police, under his authority, had been sanctioned by the federal court. So Clinton knew that this was a problem before he became president and did nothing.
Wow. You know, and I'm sure the people that are watching will just love this, and this is history. I mean, and you're a professor at Temple University. You know, and I just want to say I'd like to thank you for coming on the show. I want to have you on again. You know, you're dropping a lot of knowledge, and I'm gonna send this out to thousands of people. And it's just been, you know, the knowledge you have going around the basically almost around the world, Africa, London, England, all these different places, and the work you've done here in America, and specifically, yeah, I know you worked on Mumia Abu Jamal case situations up that. I know you've the criminal justice system, poverty, and all, you know, a lot of stuff all over the country. And you know, you're a powerful brother, and you have taught, you know, because I know some individuals that, you know, went to your class, and you were their professor. And I think it was a guy from Trenton, Tony. I think he's one of the editors or writers. You were his professor. So, you know, everybody, you know, if anybody went to Temple University with journalism, they had your class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'll be glad to come back there. We'll hook that up. And thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. And I always like to share information. I mean, that's what I feel is my mission in life. If I have any abilities, because I can't dance, I was never too good talking with the ladies. But, you know, I think I have this ability to connect dots on things.
Oh, yeah,
and that's what I like to do.
And I know you're excited about the Eagles.
Oh, yeah. I was down there.
You was down there?
Today. I went to the parade. I just wanted to feel that energy and experience. And it was really incredible watching so many people of different races and classes and creeds just there on a common vibe to celebrate the Eagles. And if it was just for that one day, it was just nice to see, because I know what's going to happen tomorrow. Everybody's going to be gritting on each other.
Yeah, and you know, I would have went, but it was just cold. You know, I just can't.
Oh, yeah. Hey, bro. It was cold.
Yeah. So, you know, and like I said, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show. I definitely want to have you on again and again and again, because you're dropping knowledge. And I know a lot of my listeners, viewers, that, you know, they love knowledge. I know James G say he's getting a lesson. James Lee out of Trenton say he's getting a lesson. And, you know, you're a historical person, and you're probably one of the greatest journalism, not just black, but journalism around Philadelphia, around the country, and people know who you are. So I'd like to thank you for, you know, coming on the show. And, you know, one of the things I want to discuss with you in the next show is go more in depth in the criminal justice system in Philadelphia, the Delaware Valley, New Jersey area, and also, you know, there's other, you know, the poverty, you know, and the politics of black politics, you know, and you know, and because we've had, you know, like you said, you know, Jesse, Kwesi, and Fume at Million Man March. We had a lot of politicians, black politicians, who supported the Clintons, and didn't say nothing about the, you know, basically lead that movement against the 94 crime bill, the blacks in prison, and also about the Linn Bias case. Linn Bias, when he that's where
a lot of these crack laws came out of. And that was the wrong case to do. But when we look at
he died of a cocaine overdose.
Yeah, he died of a powder cocaine overdose.
Yeah, powder.
But then, you know, the fact that there was so much cocaine in the country, some of which was manufactured into crack, was a consequence, small consequence, of the U.S. government policies to try to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. And they went into cahoots with Colombian cocaine traffickers, and that's what put a lot of cocaine into our communities. So, yeah, I would love to talk about the law, because when we look at a lot of times in terms of how racism is structured in this country and how it's institutionalized, and we look at Capitol Hill and laws, be it from Harrisburg or Trenton, but what we overlook too often is the racism that has been in the law, because any law that's passed by a legislature has to be certified by the courts, and it has been the courts that have put or kept racism in business. Let me just leave you with one last thing. I just said a minute ago that one of the first states and one of the states that has practiced racial profiling the most was New Jersey. In the 1820s, the New Jersey Supreme Court issued a ruling, and one of the lines from the ruling said that it has been the practice of this court to view any black that come before us as a slave until the contrary is proven. So in New Jersey, although New Jersey was the last northern state to outlaw slavery,
yes.
They didn't outlaw slavery until after the Civil War was over. There were a lot of free blacks. But when you went into a court, the courts would look at you as a slave unless a white person came in and certified you. So that was the thinking back then, but that's the same kind of thinking that pervaded racial profiling. You're black, whoop, you're a criminal, whoop, you're a drug dealer.
Yeah.
So that kind of mentality spanned centuries.
And yes, you're definitely right. And I want to also eventually in another show or so talk about the opiate problem
Absolutely.
right now, about what's happening now, and you know, how do you feel about what's happening with the opiate, and so many of our young people are overdosing. So I want to definitely get talk about that in the next couple shows. But I thank you for coming on the show. You know, you're a great brother, you're a great man, and you know, I just got so excited about you coming on the show. You just had to come on the show, and I had to tell everybody I'm gonna send this all over, and there are people right now that are watching. So I'd like to thank you, Mr. Linn Washington, for Temple University professor. Is there any other sites you want to mention that you're working with? Because I know you're working with.
Well, I don't write for the Tribune anymore. I write for a Philadelphia-based entity called Aldia, A-L-D-I-A. It's a Hispanic language newspaper, but they also their online is in English.
Okay.
So if you just put in Linn Washington, Aldia, my columns are there. And I also write for a website that we're a part of that, you know, I was one of the founding members.
This Can't Be Happening?
This Can't Be Happening.
Yeah, this can't be
because
happening.
It does happen, then it can't be happening, it shouldn't be, so we write about it.
All right. What's in your articles, are there, have you ever, I just want to ask you one more question about your articles. Is there any, what's the top article have you ever wrote?
Oh man, I've written thousands and thousands of articles, and it amazes me that the articles that I get the most response from are generally the ones that I don't put a whole lot of time in on. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna write this down. They're like, whoa, you know, get a lot of reactions to investigative reports that I spend months on. It's like, yeah, okay, you know. So I don't know, man. I mean, you know, my reportage from Africa, my reportage from Europe, but I can't even in my own mind say what I think the best article is, because the way I work, I try to make the best article the next one that I'm writing.
Oh, okay.
Keep trying to do what I can to get better and to be more efficient in telling the story and exposing things.
Because a lot of people know you from Mia Abu-Jamal, all the articles from there.
Yeah. Listen, I've covered that case since the day of his arrest on December 9th, 1981. I guess that's why I have all these gray hairs, man. I've been around all that time.
All right. Well, I think, you know, I just want to keep going on, but my battery is about to die. So I just want to thank you for coming on. It's been great. It's been awesome. And I know that people are watching, and I'm going to share this video all around the country.
Okay, Daryl.
All right.
Take care,
thank you, my brother.
Good enough.
Take
Peace.
Care. Hi, this is the On Fire show with I had Mr. Linn Washington on from Temple University. It's been exciting, and you know, it's just amazing. I'm just so happy to have this professor from Temple University, Mr. Linn Washington, and the On Fire show. I like to say all you have it's getting late, so I just like to say thank y'all for watching. My mouth was getting dry. I did 3 shows in about 4 hours, 3 1-hour shows in 4 hours. So it's been a long day. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in a couple of days. I'm taking a day off to get some rest and go back to work tomorrow morning. So this is the On Fire show. God bless, and I'll see you around with some great interviews. I'm out.